Sveiki, esu Agnė. Kazimiero Simonavičiaus universiteto verslo saugumo rizikų valdymo nuotolinių studijų vadovė. Šiandien, 2012 m. gruodžio 19 d. vyko konferencija su ISECOM direktoriumi Pete Herzog, kurios metu buvo pasakojama apie pasitikėjimą žmonėmis įvairiose institucijose, bei apie galimybę laikyti saugumo analitiko egzaminą ir gauti sertifikatą. Kviečiu Jūs pasižiūrėti paskaitos sutrumpintą versiją.
So basically the biggest problem with trust is that most of what we have known in research, especially in psychology, is about how people perceive trust. Okay, it's not really how trust works operationally. We basically only know it biochemically. We know it as a feeling. And say people handle trust like a wine taster might rate a wine. It's very biased, and it has a lot to do with how they're feeling at the moment. Because remember, as human beings, we're still just biochemical creatures. We react to the chemicals in our environment. Those chemicals in our environment affect us and how we think. So when we are making decisions, we are influenced by more things than you can possibly imagine, which is why trust is often broken. People trust poorly. A lot of times people use things like other people's opinions, Amazon, eBay. They all have a whole series of comments, and people can get feedback whether or not they like a product. And we trust that in order to make our decision in buying the product. But should we? Does that make a difference to us? And these are the kinds of things I need to look at from a security perspective as to why we trust and if it makes any sense. As a matter of fact, a lot of this research that we've done in security has entered into the psychology and the neurobiology field, and I've started doing presentations in those areas as well. So basically, we have to understand where trust comes from, why people think of trust illogically. And a lot of this comes from the fact that from the moment you're born, actually even before the moment you're born, you start collecting these rules in your head. And these rules are what guide you as to what is right, what is wrong, what to trust, what not to trust. Now these rules are put into your head somewhat, well, before you're born, they're put in there chemically, which influences your biology. For example, if your mother, while pregnant with you, had a lot of stress, or if she had some other problems, this creates cortisol inside of you. So if, let's say, your mom got in a lot of fights with your dad, or there's other things, poverty, war, these things all affect the unborn child chemically, which biologically affects their brain, which we now know actually makes them slower, lowers their IQ, causes all sorts of emotional problems, which really affects how they think and how they trust. So later, as they grow up and they become children, they become adults, they're actually worse at decision making because those decisions are influenced by something that happened before they were even born. Now, the moment you're born, you start collecting rules. Don't touch this, do touch that, I can do this, I can't do that, every time I do this, this happens. So as babies already, we start collecting these rules. Now what happens is that our brains are not perfect. Well, some people. So Runas, you're a different kind of person. But most of us, our brains aren't perfect. So what happens is we forget stuff slowly. The problem is that as you forget things in your memory, you don't know that you forget them. They might just change slightly. And you become more aware of it as you grow up. For example, I'm sure you've all had a dream, or you've thought of something, you've had a memory, that you could not remember if it really happened or if you had dreamt it at one point. And that's because these memories of yours start getting clouded. Well, this happens to your rules as well. You have these rules, and they start to fade, and sometimes it even happens where you do something, and you say, oh man, no, I did that before and the same problem happened. How could I forget that, why would I do the same thing twice? And this usually only happens after the consequence again, which is how you remembered the rule. So these rules keep building and building in your head. And of course, they don't just delete. So if, for instance, if you find there's a rule that you can't trust men, for example, you can't trust men with mustaches, and this builds into your life because your father was untrustworthy and he had a mustache, and you build this rule in your head. That rule will not just delete when you realize that's stupid, I can trust men with mustaches. No, what happens is that you build new rules that say some men with mustaches are okay. And you start building on top of these rules, never actually eliminating old rules. So what ends up happening is that in times of stress, in times of confusion, you may forget the new rules. You may not even think of them and go back to your basic rules from childhood. And this causes all sorts of psychological problems for people because they can't remember why they feel a certain way. Why am I afraid to get in a car? Why am I afraid to get on a bus? Why am I afraid to fail? These are all things that are based on rules from childhood. And the more stressed you get, the more emotional you get, the more likely you're going to fall back to your basic rules, ones from childhood, which actually really screw you up because they don't really fit into an adult world. And that's how people scam you. That's how they defraud you. That's how in security, how the scammers get you to click on a link because, okay, I have a friend, he sent me something, I can generally trust things from my friends, and if you're in security mode, maybe you won't click on that link. You'll be like, oh, I can't click on a link, I'm going to have to copy paste it. But imagine you're busy, you're stressed, you got a lot of things going on, the mail comes in, you see it's from your friend, you don't even think twice, and you just click. Why? Because curiosity is a basic childhood behavior. That's right. It's trust. As a child, you are taught to trust, but we'll get into that. I'm jumping ahead. I want to jump ahead. We're going to go into something called the What's Wrong with People photo album. And I'm going to talk about all of these, well, not all of them, just some of the problems that are caused because we are broken, because we are biochemically broken. We are taught these rules. We cannot delete these rules. And so the more we rely on trust as an emotional thing, or every time we fall back to it, we're stuck. And so we can't really break out of this. And I mean, me as a security expert, I have to tell you, this morning, I was extremely busy. I was trying to get the presentation together. I had other work to do. I had things I had to send off because I knew I was going to be in this talk this morning. And sure enough, I did get a mail from a friend. It was a viral mail, and it did have a link. And I always catch these things, and of course, I clicked on it. Now, nothing happened. Why? Because I actually protect myself. I don't allow my computer is configured to allow me to be stupid from time to time. Okay, because I know myself. I know that I can be fooled. I know I can be defrauded, and because I know that, I take steps to protect myself in advance, and I also take steps to realize when to walk away, when that I don't have to follow social convention. Okay. Because as it is, trust does affect our relationships, how we trust people. Society is all about, we should trust each other, we should get along, but we can't, because from little on, we are genetically programmed to trust certain things, okay? Facial expressions, children, small animals. You kidding? Do you have any idea how many people get killed every year because they see a baby bear? Oh, a baby bear. And they think, baby's cute, let's go pet it, without thinking that mama bear is right nearby. If you check Wikipedia for bear attacks in certain countries, you're going to see that nonstop every year there's somebody who pets a baby bear. It happens every year. So like that, there's also how we react to each other, whether somebody smiles at us, whether they frown. And then, of course, there's people whose faces are not familiar to us, or socially, they are socialized to have a certain face, whether to smile or not, and we behave differently towards them because we don't really understand. On top of that, throw in the stress of the fact that we cannot multitask, okay? Like a computer, we multitask by shoving something to the side and working on something else. We do not do two things at the same time in our heads. The very best we do is switch back and forth between the things very, very quickly, so you even fool yourself that you're doing two things at once. But the truth is you're not. And of course, the more you have to multitask, the worse you get at decision making, which I think is pretty ironic, because you think of all the people who have to make important decisions in your life, they are multitasking. They are stuck doing many things at once. You know, one of the things that I used to wonder all the time is when you see in TV shows when they do surgeries, for example, or in the hospital when they do a surgery, you have a room full of people. There's a lot of people in there. You have more than one surgeon. You have the anesthesiologist. You have nurses who hand the equipment to people. Then you have to think about politicians or presidents and people like that who multitask all the time, yet they also make the big decisions. And then we wonder, oh, how could they do that? What were they thinking? It's because you can't do more than one thing at once. Moving on. I talked about cortisol in your brain as an unborn child. However, there's other things. There's oxytocin, also known as the hug drug. People who show friendliness to you, love, affection, this causes oxytocin to get produced, which disrupts your ability to fear things. It's what makes mothers bond to babies. Okay, oxytocin is all about getting people, especially men, to trust each other. It's purely chemical. It's why parents have problems kicking out their children, despite their children being drug addicts or stealing from them. Or it's why wives stay with battering husbands, because at some point the oxytocin was developing, and it makes them trust this person, think this person is going to change. Okay? I'm just trying to show you that these are biochemical things that if you sat down as an outsider rationally and you say, why is that woman staying with that guy when he's so abusive? It's because of, it's not a logical thing, it's a chemical thing. Okay? As we go beyond that, we also have things like toxoplasmosis. Okay? There's a I'm going to say this wrong. There's a parasite called the Toxoplasma gondii. Okay, it's found in rodent feces, so the crap from mice and rats. And what happens is that it cycles between cats and mice. And what it does is that this parasite makes mice not fear cats. So they will go out and they will walk across without any kind of fear whatsoever. Here's an environmental problem. You have a parasite which affects the behavior of rats and then of cats. And the problem is that this stuff gets in the air, and it affects people as well. So people get toxoplasmosis. I think they found that about a third of the people worldwide are affected by toxoplasmosis. I have to look at the new stats. It's been about a year since I've looked, but it is an issue. And what they found is that people infected by toxoplasmosis, meaning that their body has not destroyed the parasite, they engage in risky behavior as well. It turns out that men get more fearless, more aggressive, and women get more, what's the right word to say for slutty? They get more affectionate, which is the cause of this parasite. As a matter of fact, I think most doctors' offices, most hospitals will actually check. They have tests that you can take to see if you've been affected by this parasite. It's important to know if you have it, because it will change your behavior. It will change how you trust and how you make decisions. Sorry, catching my breath now. Another thing that will affect how you trust is your childhood. One of the things that they found is that children who are born, who grow up with, they don't have to be abused. Their parents, if their parents are constantly fighting, if they grow up in poverty, in wartime, one of the key things also is that if they grow up in a family where the parents don't work, they are unemployed, this affects the children and how they trust as they grow up. I think that the most common situation is that children who grow up under these conditions tend to become clingy adults. So adults who need to be around people. They need to have friends. They need to have even strangers like them. And it causes all sorts of decision problems. So, for example, if you have them sample, if you're selling cheese and you have one of these people sample the cheese, if they take it and they eat it, they will feel compelled to buy cheese from you. Why? Because they can't stand the idea of you not liking them because they said no to you. So there is a behavioral pattern to this. One of the interesting things is they looked at it from a researcher standpoint, and they said, okay, maybe this is just dumb people. As you grow up, you get smarter, more intelligent, and these things don't affect you anymore. Well, it turns out when they did a study, they asked graduating psychologists. They proposed to them some scenarios about behavior based on brain scans. And so what they did was they found that whenever they put brain scans indicate in front of the information, even if it was something that the psychologist knew was wrong, that they knew that this wasn't the case, it wasn't possible, the moment they saw brain scan indicate, they were more likely to believe what was written there. So they even fell for this. As long as it said brain scans indicate, they thought, well, it's new information, it's more scientific, so probably it's true. So, under a paper produced called Seductive, Allure of Neuroscience Explanations, they found a few interesting things. For example, people believe explanations because it satisfies their need to understand, not because it's true. Okay? You see this a lot with people who believe in ghosts. That's a big one. As long as it satisfies their need to understand, what was that strange noise I heard? Must have been a ghost. I heard this house was haunted. Okay. And that's enough for them. It doesn't have to be true. People in general have difficulty logically reasoning over explanations, so they don't even try. If an explanation is longer, people tend to think it's expert. So between two explanations, the one that is longer, people trust more as being the expert opinion. 1 in 100 people have very, very different brains. What's considered psychopathic, meaning they don't think like the rest of society. That's why they get labeled as that. Okay. It really affects how people, how we can understand people. So imagine if 99 out of 100 people all behave the way you expect them to, this 1 out of 100 then does not. And if they pretend to, you can't tell their real intentions. You can't understand them. And so what happens is we can't tell if they're telling the truth or not, which means we can't properly decide to trust them or not. And as it turns out, we know scientifically that people are horrible lie detectors. Okay? Bad people are always stereotyped. And what happens is that we can detect, they've done studies we can detect if somebody's telling the truth about 54% of the time, and if they're lying about 47% of the time. So why can we tell if people, why are we better at knowing if people tell the truth? Probably because if they lie to us, we have no feedback. We don't know. So we rarely catch people at lies, whereas we just accept the truth more often. So we have more practice in detecting truth than we do in detecting lies. Not because people lie to us less, but because we catch people less. Now, if you look at this percentages, it's about the same as flipping a coin. So we say, okay, if that doesn't work, if in general we can't tell if somebody is lying or telling the truth, it's about 50-50, what can we do? Well, there's this new science that came out called reading micro-expressions. I think there's a TV show now also about it called Trust in Me, or I can't remember now. But it's been on a couple of seasons now. And but the problem is that outside of a laboratory, okay, in a lab, people can read micro-expressions and tell a truth from a lie as much as 85% of the time. But in the real world, in the actual environment of the world, taking it out of a lab, it's only successful about 54% of the time. What does that tell you? That tells you it's pretty much about the same as those who do not receive the training. And a lot of this also is because when you enter the real world, you fall back. Remember, now you have emotions, you have stress. Imagine the person you're trying to catch lying is a spouse or a loved one or a family member. So you have an emotional attachment. Now we start falling back on those rules we developed much earlier in childhood, maybe things we've read or things we believe that aren't necessarily true, and we're bad at it. We fall back, probably not depending on our training. We just depend on our instinct, which is wrong. And so a lot of our instinct, what we think we know about liars, is wrong. So for example, we know that liars have no typical behavior. In reality, they don't. Some people talk fast when they lie, some talk slow, some shut up. There is no typical lying behavior, okay? If somebody practices a lie long enough, they can even beat lie detector machines. They can beat these micro-expression readers. They can do what they want. If you practice a lie long enough, you yourself will believe it. What they do find is that if somebody who's telling the truth, they don't tell it in chronological order. They jumble it all around, which means even if they remember it, one of the things for catching a liar is making them tell you the story in reverse. That doesn't work either, because people who are telling the truth and really want to be believed because they see that you're doubting them, they will also forget things. They will jumble things and get very nervous. They will get very twitchy. They may raise their voice because they want to be understood. But that's just some people. Some people, when they sense that you think they're lying, they just might say, oh, forget it, I don't care, shut up, and they close off to you. So there is no Pinocchio's nose. There is no clear-cut way to tell if somebody's lying. One of the more interesting ways I see it is, for example, when you look at children, why children lie. Basically what happens is with children is that they're following a pattern. They are reactive. So oftentimes kids don't lie because it betters them, or they think that they think that they need to lie to get out of something. They do it to react. And one of the ways you see this is that it depends on how you say something to a child. Children are pretty pure for studying this way, and if you know children, I suggest you actually try this. When you deal with, we've dealt with parents who say their children are what's it called? Pathological liars. They lie all the time. And what we find is that it has to do with how their parents talk to them and how those kids then react. So for example, if you want to see if a kid broke something, let's say you walk into a room, you see a broken lamp, and you say to the kid, "Did you break that?" The first thing they're going to react and say, "No," because that's what they do. No. And if you can actually this milk, and you say, "Did you finish that milk?" And they would say no. They say it because they react, and they're afraid of being in trouble, afraid of making you mad. Whereas if you find a broken lamp and you say, "Oh, phew, I heated that thing. Man, I'm glad it's gone. Who do I have to thank for that?" And the kid will more likely tell you the truth. Usually they do. It's because kids follow patterns. So a lot of times kids do it because lying for them is a way of denial, is a refuge, so they don't feel embarrassed, okay? And one of the ways that they say that, well, what I've also found is that you handle lies quietly without the embarrassment. What you want is a child who just doesn't lie every time you raise your voice. So people delude themselves. They lie to themselves when something unpleasant or something distressful. Another thing we find is that when we start something new, and it's difficult because everything you start brand new is difficult, people like to downplay how effective it is, how good it is. So they start something new and then they say, you know, I don't, it's not really any good anyways, it's not interesting, it just won't help me. You see this in learning new languages. The moment people start to learn a new language, the moment they start, they say, what do I need to learn this for anyways? It's hard, I don't have time for it, I could never learn this. After they've done it a little while, they can say they can do it. The problem is themselves at the very beginning because they get an emotional response. It's stressful, it's new, it's hard, it's change. This brings us to the Dunning-Kruger Effect, which some of you know, which basically says that our own incompetence prevents us from seeing our own incompetence. Okay? If you're unable to do something, more than likely you are unable to know that you are unable to do something. And this is, again, where you get a lot of armchair athletes and people who all have advice because everybody thinks that they can do it better. So next I want to talk about something called triggers. So triggers, there's two types of ways that we are affected immediately from people in our environment. Now that you understand how we behave with life, make decisions, there's a thing called triggers, which tells us that these things make us react a certain way. Triggers are based on stuff that you've learned from little on. These are old school rules that you have that you could never get rid of, and they make sense to you. And part of it is because they save you time. If you believe these things, they save you time and energy, which especially most people on this planet don't have in much supply. So I'm going to run through these pretty quickly because we don't have much time. But some of these triggers are if you give in to a bargain. So if we're both trying to make a deal and I make the deal better, meaning I lower my price, you feel compelled to buy it because I made a bargain. Two others are scarcity and composability. Just watching the slides to see if the law, yeah. If something is scarce, one of the things that happens, or you get or you get other people recommending it that you think you trust. These are all tricks. So for example, you want to buy an item, you're not sure if you want it, but it's the last one. So that tells you two things. One is that it's the last one. If you want, you better make a decision right now. And composability basically says, well, it looks like a lot of people wanted this item because there's only one left. I should probably get it. It's a trick that we fool ourselves. Another one is you get what you pay for. If it pops up. If something is expensive, you think it's worth it. If it's cheap or free, you think there's a reason for why it is. Anecdotal evidence. and transitivity. There's nothing more powerful as an advertising medium than to get somebody you trust to offer you or advise you on getting an item. People believe anecdotal evidence at a much higher level than any scientific evidence. Why? Because you heard it from somebody they trust. You heard from your parents. You tend to believe. It's another one. Transitivity says that if your mother trusts the doctor, then you can trust the doctor. And we know that just because one person, you're going to have the same relationship with that person or that they're going to care. Next, searching for social clues and acceptance. A lot of times we make our decisions based on having other people like us or what other people are doing. There's an example of people who get injured in front of huge crowds and don't find any help, because if nobody's helping, people don't stop to help. They just think that either somebody else will get it or there's a reason why nobody is helping. So one of the things we do when we make decisions is we look for social clues, okay? For example, I told you about people who offer you cheese from, if they're selling cheese, they offer you one from cheese. If you see nobody is stopping to get cheese, even though it's offered for free, there's a good chance that you won't pick it up either, okay? Association. We tend to trust people who are associated to the same groups that we are, the same culture that we are. Another case is if we identify somebody famous or a special brand or a special food, or there's a reason why they put beautiful women standing next to sports cars they want to sell, because we identify the things that we see with the item. So you have you have two equal products, one by with and the other doesn't. You're more likely to trust the one with the brand on it. I think this has screwed up a lot of people in the past with IT equipment, because IT companies tend to buy out each other constantly. Cisco and Linksys and Microsoft buying out Skype and things like that. And the thing is, if you trust one brand, then you're going to suddenly trust the other brand along with it. But we know that that's not always the case. So another place where we tend to trust is experts and authorities. Security is an interesting field, as I was telling somebody the other day, because I think security has more experts or people who say they're experts than probably herbal medicine. Well, medicine, these alternative cures, who, yeah, has probably just as many experts as security. Why? Because people in security like to proclaim themselves as experts. Why? Because they want to be the authority. They want to be the one that you trust. And since from little on, again, we are taught by our parents, you trust your parent, you have to listen to your parents, you listen to your teachers, the policemen, the firemen. These are all experts and authorities. The fireman is an expert on fire, they tell you. Of course, when you're an adult and you have anything to do with fire control or fire prevention, like a fireman does, you realize that they are not necessarily experts in fire. They might be experts in putting out a fire, but it doesn't mean that they can tell you how a fire started or why or what to do. And I see this a lot in security too, in towns, where they'll have the police chief talking to a school about to the kids about how to be safer. The police chief isn't an expert in safety or security. He is an authority, but the thing is that doesn't necessarily make that right. It doesn't mean that they have the answers. Which brings us to another childhood dilemma, to obey or not to obey. Of course, from little on you're taught obedience. You have to listen to what your parents tell you, and you have to do what they tell you. And what happens is that as you grow up, there's a lot of people who stick with that. So they did some interesting studies where people were walking on the street and they put a piece of trash next to the garbage can, and they found that if somebody in a uniform, like a policeman, for example, told that person, hey, pick that up, even though it wasn't their trash, people tended to do it without even missing a step. They were just walking, policeman told them, they picked up the trash, threw it in the garbage. That's it. They were obeying without thinking. Another big trick is to get people to commit. So once you can get somebody to commit to something where they say, I will do it, more than likely people will do it. And even if they find out that it's wrong or a bad decision, they will stick with it because they said they would. They would be committed. They're not going to stop because they don't want to, they call it their integrity or their, this is my personality, this is who I am. I don't want to be, if I say I'm going to do something, then I'm going to do it. Again, makes no sense. If something is wrong, it's wrong, and you're done. Which brings us then to consistency. People will do things because they've always done it. That's how it is. That's how we've always done it. That's how it's going to be. And people have trouble breaking out of consistent behavior. Okay. So what do we do about all of this stuff that we know about how we are broken? It's not so easy. One of the things you have to do is realize that you have a problem. You are broken. You have problems with you that don't allow you to trust. You're not going to be able to make the right decision when you need to under certain conditions. Okay, you won't be able to think logically. Of course, maybe this doesn't matter when you try to decide what to eat for breakfast. Definitely will decide on what you want to do with your career, what you want to do professionally, and what you want to know or who you want to be. So, of course, once we know this, we say, okay, what do we do? How do we react? And, of course, as the day gets longer, meaning the more things you do during the day, the more your willpower falls apart, and by evening, your willpower. What we find people is that who have pretty even personalities, they will start making up. Okay, we're multitasking, we have more to do, and we're getting tired. You put people into stressful jobs, stressful positions. Security is one of them, and they will lose the ability to make good decisions much faster because they're wearing on their own willpower, their mental ability to make good decisions. And one of the things we've been doing here at ISECOM is trying to figure out tricks, things that we can do to help people realize when they're doing the wrong thing. And I've had many talks. We've had a lot of research done on this, and it's something we're working on. We've come up with some techniques. Again, it's much more than I could possibly talk about here in this particular presentation. But there are things you can do. And one of the things I'm going to show you is we came up with trust properties. Basically, you can apply these 10 trust properties to any situation, a contract, a decision, a person, and decide if you have enough information to trust them. And of course, in a security standpoint, if you don't have enough information to trust, or the information shows you in some ways that you can't trust, you can do things, fix that. So, for example, one of the things you see in the military, especially in basic training, they do a lot of these things that are similar to the trust properties to make the soldiers trust each other. It's really a type of brainwashing, but it actually works. They do all the tricks to do this. You'll see these tricks. You'll recognize these in other tricks as well. So, for example, probably from elementary school, how your teacher conducted a class. You'll see it within your own family, how a lot of times you'll see this between mothers and children, how they manipulate them to behave or to act a certain way. You see it in politics all the time. If you start seeing these trust properties and you say, hey, I have no reason to believe that this guy is going to do what he says. So these trust properties are really interesting because what we find is that, what we find is that in these trust properties, the average person needs one property to be fulfilled or successful for them to trust. We found then is that cynical people, or people who say they don't trust either, or that they're cynical, they're satisfied with just 3 properties. But what we found is that all 10 properties, or the majority of properties, should be satisfied for you to actually have any reason to trust at all. So we're going to go through the 10. Okay. The first one is size. So basically, the number that you have to trust, the number of participants, the number of subjects, okay? Do you have to just trust one, or do you have to trust many? It makes it, the more you have to trust in a group, the harder it is to trust them, the less likely you should, because any one of them can influence another one of them. So basically, you're diluting your trust. You see this a lot also with couples, married couples, who don't make decisions on their own anymore. You're not just getting one of them to make a decision. You have to trust them and your spouse. The next one is symmetry. Basically, do you have to trust them? Do they have to trust you? Do you have to trust each other? That's something you have to look at. Then there's visibility. How transparent are they? How much do you know their intentions? How much do you know about them? Waiting, small delay in the slide. Okay, there we go. You know, these are the kinds of things you have to know. How transparent are their intentions? And actually, transparency is usually a trick that a lot of people do, or people and corporations do, to make you feel trust for them. Because if you're just satisfied with one trust property, then transparency is it. They say, hey, this is our intentions. This is what we want to do. This is, if you give me the money, this is what I'm going to do with it. I'm so honest, you know? And if it seems for real, they're actually being transparent. They say, oh, you want, you walk in, you look at my books, and sure, they could lie to you on all other properties. Subjugation, another property that says how much control or influence do you have over the subject or the source. So it reminds me of an example where I have a family member who runs in a different political party for the town where I live. And it's not a party that I typically vote for. And so for national elections, I'll vote one. Well, usually I just vote for the best person, the person I believe the most, the one I can trust the most. But it's generally never somebody from that particular party where my family member is in. The thing, though, is that I always vote for that party in my town. And somebody asked me why, and I said, because I know the person. I can control the person. If I could control the president, hell, I would always vote for that guy, you know, if I knew that that's the person. And it's the same thing here. I'm not voting for the party. I'm not voting for their ideas. I'm voting because I know that this family member I can see once a week at least at dinner time and say, hey, what are you thinking? What are you doing? And I can talk to them, and I can try to influence them or change their decisions. That is subjugation. That is how much control I have over them. I have more reason to trust them as a politician because I can control them. Next one is consistency. Basically, any historical evidence that you can pick up of your subject, of the person failing or losing a trust or belaying a trust. One of the things they say in America when it comes to dating, they say once a cheater, always a cheater. So they say if you found out that if a girl meets a guy while he has another girl, and he's cheating on the other one, then more than likely he's going to cheat on the new one. That's one of the sayings that they have. And that's basically a play on consistency as a trust property, saying, okay, it looks like in the past they failed here, which means that they're going to be likely to fail in other places. Now again, why this is bad? Because this is making a trust decision on just one property. So those people who say once a cheater, always a cheater, they're not right. Basically, you're ignoring 9 other trust reasons by focusing on just the one. Besides consistency of failure, meaning their history, what they've done in the past where they've failed to live up to a trust, there's also how well you can tell in their integrity that they're going to change. So basically, can you tell when they're changing their decision? Can you tell when they're doing something new? When are you going to be alerted? So basically, you want to be able to know in good time that they are thinking a different way. And this is important, whether you want to trust a company or a president or a politician or a friend or a girlfriend or a boyfriend, is to know how can you tell when they've changed, when they're no longer behaving or thinking the same way anymore. And the more you can know, or the better you can know, obviously the more reason you have to trust them. Up until the point you can't trust them anymore because you've seen the signs. Now we're going to get into 2 of the trust properties that are the most contended, meaning that whenever we talk with other people who deal with security and risk, they tend to find these next 2 properties not to be about trust. And there's a lot of disagreements, but in the end, it has continued on. The first one is offsets, meaning if you break the trust, what do I get out of it? Will you be punished? Will I get a compensation prize or a compensation out of things? That's actually really important. So for example, I made a business deal recently, I made a business deal recently that said that I would develop some video training, okay? Now, the person that I'm making the deal with, this is on the premise that they get a particular contract, in which case then I will get paid for the video training. But I don't know this guy. I don't trust this guy, okay? Because, yeah, I did my trust properties against him, and basically he runs at about 50%, which tells me it could go either way. So what I did was I put in an offset. I said, okay, we will make the video training. They will pay for the production of it. And to make the video, I will supply the training materials. I will even talk on some of the video training, but they have to get some professionals to do it. I don't want to do all of it. And in the end, if they don't get the job, if they don't get the contract, I keep the video training. I made an offset. So if he's lying to me, in the end, I still get it. I keep it. But if he's telling the truth, well, then I'll sell it for the money that he's offered. And that is an offset. I have a reason to trust him more because if he breaks the trust, I still get something out of it. It's not completely for nothing. The next one is value. It's a financial offset, which is kind of weird when you talk about romance. Should I trust a girl I meet in a bar? Should you trust a boy you meet at school? Should you trust? And one of the areas is value. What is your financial offset for risk? Meaning, what do you gain out of it? What kind of financial incentive is there for you to do this? And of course, you know, people like to think of romance and love and not about buying people, which is always hard when you look at this. But in marriages, a lot of times it is about money and how money gets split and what you get and what it means. And of course, so money is very much so a reason to trust that somebody is going to do and behave the way they say they will, even if it's not romantic. So we used to think about, that was one of the properties where we weren't sure if it should be about money or just about how you value something, like a friendship, or you value your childhood toy, or something that means something, sentimental value. And in the end, we figure that doesn't work because it's too easy to manipulate somebody emotionally that way. So we should just, if we want to do it reasonably, logically, we have to focus on the actual financial value. The next one is components. If you want to trust anything, you have to know, like we said with size, how many there are, but you also have to know how many components there are to it. So for example, in trusted computing, you might trust the operating system, you might trust the networking, but there's a lot of chips in there that come from another country or another place that you can't just blindly trust because you don't know if they're snooping on your information or what they're doing. And it's the same thing with people or with other things as well, because you want to be able to know what makes up this person. Why does this person need this job? Why is this person acting this way? And it actually brings out a very important part of human relationships, is called empathy. And empathy is being able to feel or understand what somebody else is going through, knowing that somebody else has to put food on the table, knowing that somebody else has to meet family obligations, social pressures, that they're going to behave a certain way. It really helps you understand what makes that person. And of course, if there's parts of what make them that you don't like or that you don't see as trustworthy, you don't have to trust them for it. It can get complicated. Obviously, when we teach trust training, trust analysis training, we get more into detail and help you understand these things. The final one is porosity. Porosity is basically what is the separation between the environment and the thing you have to trust. So for example, I'll bring up the military again. When they train military soldiers, they're not allowed to leave the base. They have to eat, sleep, drink, think military 24 hours a day for usually 6 to 8 weeks before they're allowed the first chance to leave. So the more that they are separated out, the funny thing is that you can see this in divorce rates. So there are studies that have shown that couples who don't have very many friends, basically they are their own best friends, and they don't socialize much. They don't go out. There's not a drinking group that he goes to. He doesn't hang out with his friends. She doesn't hang out with her friends twice a week, or have this night away from each other. Those people tend to stay together much, much longer, significantly longer. So as long as they are separating themselves from their environment, from other influences, the more time in that sense that they spend together, the actual longer they stay together. And then you look at this, they've done studies with things like Facebook. Facebook has allowed people who normally spend time together, who don't have friends that influence them, or work colleagues that might influence them. All of a sudden with Facebook, once they started going on, they started meeting all these new people and being influenced by it, which led to a huge rate of divorces in these kinds of people. So this all came down to how they were separated from their environment.